Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving into some pretty unique ideas today on how to achieve a second wind in life. We're looking at this lecture called Second Wind, Unleashing Chaos and Gaining Unstoppable Momentum. And this speaker, they don't exactly advocate for playing it safe, that's for sure.
Yeah, you could say that. It's a pretty bold approach. So the lecture really argues that instead of always trying to find balance and comfort, maybe we should be leaning into chaos, even discomfort, to kind of reach our full potential.
Interesting. Right away, the speaker kind of throws down the gauntlet. They say, fuck the process. Now, I don't know about you, but that got my attention. But is there any truth to that?
Yeah.
Can we actually gain some serious momentum by going through discomfort?
Well, that's what we're here to figure out, right? The first section jumps right into the core idea. Momentum doesn't care about your comfort. It challenges this whole idea that to be successful, everything has to be, smooth sailing.
Yeah, it's like we're taught to avoid burnout at all costs and, strive for balance. But maybe, and this is what the lecture suggests, maybe that's actually holding us back.
That's exactly what they're saying. They argue that by always trying to be balanced, you're really just staying inside this small little box. They use this image running into your second wind with your face full of chaos. It's not about easing into it, nice and smooth. It's more about raw, messy power.
I like that imagery a lot. So instead of being afraid of those times when you like hit a wall or you just feel completely drained, maybe we should lean into those moments.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. Those times when you're exhausted, those are chances, those are opportunities to break through to a whole new level. It's like asking, what am I going to do with this exhaustion? Am I going to let it stop me? Or am I going to use it to get even more momentum?
That's a really good point. So instead of asking, am I tired? We should be asking, what am I going to do about this tiredness? But, everyone gets tired, right? I mean, what makes some people break through and others just stay stuck?
Well, that's where the next section comes in. Section 2 is called Get Comfortable with the Uncomfortable. And it digs into this idea that discomfort, that's just a necessary hurdle you got to get over to reach a new level of power.
Okay, so it's not about avoiding discomfort entirely. It's more about reframing it. Like discomfort's a sign that you're on the right track.
Exactly. This lecture is pushing back against this, like this expectation that being successful always has to feel good. It has to be easy. The speaker's point seems to be that real growth, it happens when we're willing to embrace the struggle. You got to push yourself beyond that comfort zone.
It's funny. When we think of getting a second win, usually we think about like you're finally catching your breath, things are easy again. But this lecture, it defines second win differently. It's less about, finally relaxing. It's more about this like primal power.
That's a great point. It's a really important difference. What they're saying is, second wind, it's not about coasting. It's about tapping into this deeper, deeper source of energy that you can only reach when you're willing to push through resistance, push through discomfort and all those challenges.
Okay, so we've got comfort as the enemy and discomfort as like the secret weapon. But how do we actually do that? How do we reject that, like the soft way, and get on the path to this intense second win?
Well, that's where section 3 gets really interesting. It's called Reject Normalcy, Be a Goddamn Outlaw. And it's like this call to break free from all those predefined ideas about success, like forge your own path.
Yeah. Pretty strong words, but I think it makes the point. It's like the speaker is saying, stop trying to follow the rule book because there isn't one.
That's it. That's it, exactly. Their argument is, if you're just always trying to follow someone else's recipe for success, you're not really leading, you're just following. To really unlock your potential, you got to be an outlaw, like a trailblazer who isn't afraid to, shake things up a little bit.
I see the connection back to the idea of comfort as the enemy. If you're always playing it safe, never coloring outside the lines, you'll never really discover what you're truly capable of.
Absolutely. The lecture actually says to burn the book. Stop reading those prepackaged guides to success. Stop trying to fit yourself into someone else's definition of what success means. Those blueprints, those usually only lead to a really limited version of what's possible.
So instead of relying on those blueprints, those external things, we should be turning inward, trusting our own gut.
That seems to be what they're getting at, yeah.
Yeah.
It's about embracing that outlaw attitude. Not literally, of course, but in the sense of like defying convention and forging your own unique path.
And that takes some serious courage, right? To step outside what everyone else is doing and embrace that uncertainty of making your own way.
Oh, definitely. The lecture really seems to be saying that fearlessness, that's a key ingredient to unleashing that second wind.
I'm noticing a theme here. It seems like a lot of this is about our mindset. about shifting how we see things like discomfort and uncertainty.
Yeah, totally. It's about realizing that true momentum, a lot of times it's on the other side of fear, on the other side of all those little beliefs that are telling us to play it safe, to stay within the lines.
Okay, so we're getting rid of the rule book, we're getting cozy with the uncomfortable, we're embracing that inner outlaw. What other, like, out there strategies does this lecture offer for achieving this unstoppable momentum?
So section 4 takes a pretty unexpected turn. The title is Get Mad, Get Weird, Channel the Madness. And it actually suggests we tap into something that, society usually tells us to avoid: anger.
Okay, this is where it gets really, really interesting. So instead of trying to suppress anger, even frustration, rage, the speaker is saying we should be channeling those into action.
Right, it's a pretty big departure from what we're usually told, right? Manage your anger, find your calm. But this lecture, it argues that there's this raw power in those intense emotions. And you can actually use it for good.
Yeah, and it's not talking about being a little annoyed. The speaker even says you don't need to meditate to find your center. You need to tap into your rage. That's intense.
Yeah. It really challenges how we normally think about managing emotions. We're always told to find that calm and rational place. But what if there's this wellspring of energy that's locked up in all those intense feelings?
That's an interesting thought, but how do we actually do that? How do we tap into that rage, that anger, and do it constructively without just, losing it?
That is a really good question. And honestly, the lecture doesn't quite go into how to two-part. It's more focused on recognizing the power of those emotions, not so much on a step-by-step guide for using them.
Okay, so it's about seeing those feelings, anger, frustration, in the right context, seeing them as motivators. But I have to admit, I'm a little unsure about this channel the rage thing. I mean, couldn't that backfire?
That's a valid point for sure. Remember, this lecture is just one perspective, and it's not necessarily saying to just let loose with no boundaries.
What I find interesting is that it really makes you think about those emotions we usually label negative, like anger. Maybe there's a way to reframe those as sources of energy, sources of drive.
Exactly. It's recognizing that every emotion, even the ones that feel uncomfortable, they can have a purpose.
Okay, so we're getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, channeling our anger, becoming outlaws. What else is in this, like, unconventional playbook for unstoppable momentum?
Well, in section 5, they flip the script on another piece of conventional wisdom: rest and pacing. It's titled Accelerate When Everyone Else is Shutting Down.
Hold on, so instead of resting when we're tired, we should push harder. That goes against everything we're told about, burnout.
Yeah, it does challenge the typical approach. The lecture argues that real momentum, you often find that in those moments when you push past what feels good, past what everyone else is doing.
It's kind of like a contrarian strategy. Everyone else is hitting the brakes, you're hitting the gas. But isn't that, dangerous? Pushing ourselves too far?
That's a good point to bring up, and it's something that we're going to explore more as we go deeper into this. It's good to remember, this lecture is one perspective, one point of view, not necessarily telling you to go completely overboard.
I guess it's about finding that balance between pushing your limits and knowing when you need to stop.
Right. It's understanding that pushing boundaries can lead to breakthroughs, but you also got to be mindful of your own well-being. We'll look more into that idea of balance later on.
Okay, so we're pushing past exhaustion. We're speeding up when everyone else is slowing down. What's the final piece of this unconventional puzzle?
So section 6 really hammers it home. Stop playing nice, fake comfort, fake stability. It's really rejecting the status quo. It's about embracing that discomfort and pushing those boundaries.
Again, pretty strong language, but it gets the message across.
I know, right? And I think that intensity, that's on purpose, is meant to kind of shake us up, make us question those beliefs that tell us to always play it safe, comfort first.
The speaker argues that people who achieve this unstoppable momentum, those are the people who are willing to, reject what everyone else says is normal, to get uncomfortable, even to get a little weird.
Yeah, and they contrast those people with the ones who are always looking for stability and comfort, versus the ones who embrace chaos and push themselves to the edge.
Sounds like they're saying that real growth, it happens outside our comfort zone, when we're willing to risk failure and jump into the unknown.
Exactly. And the speaker's final words really say it all. So when you hit your second wind, go fucking insane. Shatter everything you thought was possible.
Whoa, that's a lot to take in. Really makes you think. But is any of it true? Can embracing all this discomfort and chaos really lead to big breakthroughs? And how do we balance that with taking care of ourselves? That's what we'll be looking at in part 2 of this deep dive. Stay tuned.
See you there. Welcome back to our deep dive into second wind, unleashing chaos and gaining unstoppable momentum.
So we've been talking about some, unconventional ideas about how to unlock a new level of drive and power in life.
It's been quite a ride. We've gone from fuck the process to get comfortable with the uncomfortable to channel the madness. This speaker definitely doesn't shy away from bold statements. But before we get swept up in this whole go insane thing, maybe we should pause for a second and think about what that actually means, practically speaking.
Yeah, that's a really important point. The lecture itself doesn't really lay out a step-by-step plan, does it? It's more about a fundamental change in how we think, how we approach challenges and goals.
So it's not so much about following a formula. It's more about developing a certain attitude, a way of being, in the world that embraces discomfort and uncertainty. Exactly. It's about that fearlessness, that willingness to just experiment, that drive to keep pushing beyond what we think we're capable of. It's almost like the speaker is saying, here are the principles, now go out and create your own chaos.
That's a great way to put it. But honestly, create my own chaos sounds a little intimidating. Isn't it just easier to, stick to the rules, follow a path that's already laid out?
Sure, it might feel easier in the short term, but this lecture is all about reminding us that real growth that usually happens outside our comfort zone, in those moments when we're willing to, risk failing, embrace the unknown.
So this whole second wind concept, it's not about just coasting along. It's about finding that strength, that inner strength to keep pushing even when it gets really hard.
And that resilience, that determination to keep moving forward no matter what, that's where the real power is.
Okay, I'm with you on that. So we're embracing discomfort, channeling our inner drive, pushing past those limits we set for ourselves. But what if this whole go insane energy, what if it takes us down a path that's, self-destructive? Can we really keep up this level of intensity, forever?
That's a crucial question. And to be honest, the lecture doesn't really address it directly. It emphasizes the power of pushing boundaries and embracing chaos, but it doesn't really get into the potential downsides of that approach.
So it's great to unleash our inner drive, but we also need to be aware of what could go wrong.
Absolutely. And that's where balance comes in. It's not something the lecture says directly, but I think it's implied. Even when we're in the middle of chaos, pursuing things relentlessly, we still got to find a way to recharge, to avoid burning out.
So it's not that we should completely forget about self-care. It's more about finding a new kind of balance, one that includes both the intensity of that second wind and the wisdom to know when we need to step back, to recharge.
Right. It's like a high-performance engine. It needs the right fuel, of course,
Oh.
but it also needs maintenance to make sure it doesn't overheat and break down. So we got to find that sweet spot, pushing ourselves, but also knowing when to take a break.
Because if we're not careful, that drive could lead to burnout. And ultimately, that would work against us. It would ruin the momentum we're working so hard to build.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to approach this going insane idea carefully, with self-awareness, knowing our own limits, recognizing the signs of burnout before it happens. Things like always feeling tired, being irritable, having trouble focusing, losing motivation. Those are all signs that maybe we're pushing too hard.
Yeah, those are pretty clear signs. But sometimes it's hard to slow down when you're in the zone, It's like you're
Yeah.
caught up in that momentum and it's hard to stop.
I hear you. But think about it this way. Those breaks, those times when you rest and recover, those aren't signs that you're weak. They're more like strategic pauses that'll help you come back even stronger.
Okay, I see what you mean. But what about this whole go insane thing? How does that fit in with self-care? It seems kind of contradictory.
It might seem that way at first glance, but I think the key is to find a rhythm, a sustainable rhythm that has both. Maybe you have periods of intense focus and effort where you're really pushing boundaries, embracing discomfort, and then you have periods of rest and rejuvenation where you prioritize, taking care of yourself.
So it's not about being on 24/7. It's about finding a rhythm that works for you, one that lets you tap into that drive without sacrificing, your health and happiness.
Exactly. And that rhythm is going to be different for everybody. There's no one right way to do it. It's about experimenting, figuring out what works for you.
So it's this constant process of adjusting, fine-tuning our approach as we go.
Yes. And remember, this idea of a second wind, it's a journey, not a destination. There will be ups and downs, moments of crazy momentum, and moments when we need to step back and recharge.
That's a good reminder. It's not about reaching some perfect state of unstoppable energy. It's about embracing the whole process, the ups and downs.
And learning to trust ourselves along the way.
Exactly. So As we move into the final part of our deep dive, what's your biggest takeaway from all of this? What's that one piece of wisdom that you'll be taking with you?
For me, it's this. Pushing boundaries, embracing discomfort, those are definitely important for unlocking our potential. But to be truly successful, we also need to understand ourselves, our needs, our limits. It's about finding that balance between, moving forward and taking care of ourselves, between unleashing chaos and finding some inner peace.
That's a powerful insight. And it brings me to my final thought for our listeners to think about. Can we really harness this intense drive, this go insane energy, and still maintain some balance and well being? Or are those things just completely opposite?
That's a great question to consider. And in the end, it's up to each listener to figure out their own answer. Just like all the ideas we've talked about today, there's no easy solution. But the journey of exploring these ideas, asking these questions, trying different things, that's where the real growth is.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive. We've been exploring this lecture on finding that second wind. And, we've covered some really interesting ground, haven't we? From embracing being uncomfortable to channeling anger to pushing past exhaustion. It's been a lot.
Yeah, it's really been a journey. Lots of unconventional ideas about how we think about motivation and success.
For sure. And now that we're wrapping up, I think everyone's wondering, okay, how do we actually use these ideas? How do we take that go insane energy and make it work in our lives in a way that feels, authentic and also sustainable?
Yeah, that's the challenge, isn't it? We can talk about embracing chaos and pushing boundaries, but we got to take care of ourselves too.
Right. We talked about burning out if we push too hard too fast. So how do we find that balance? How do we know when to push harder and when to, ease up a little bit?
I think self-awareness is key here. Being able to listen to what your body's telling you.
Mm.
Recognizing the signs of burnout before it hits you full force. Like if you're always tired, feeling irritable, can't focus, losing motivation, those are all signs that you're probably pushing too hard.
Yeah, those are pretty clear warning signs. But it's hard sometimes to slow down when you're really in the groove, It's like you get caught up in the momentum and it's hard to stop.
I get that, I totally do. But think of it this way. Taking those breaks, resting, recovering, those aren't signs that you're weak. Think of them as like strategic pauses.
Mm.
You come back stronger afterwards.
Okay, I see what you're saying. But what about that go insane idea? How do we balance that with taking care of ourselves? It seems kind of like contradictory.
Yeah, it might seem that way. But I think it's about finding a rhythm that works, a rhythm that includes both. Maybe you have times where you're super focused, putting in a lot of effort, pushing your limits, being okay with the discomfort. And then you have times where you're resting, taking care of yourself.
So it's not about being on all the time. It's about finding what works for you that lets you tap into that drive, that intensity without burning yourself out, without sacrificing your health and happiness.
Exactly. And that rhythm, it's going to be different for everyone, right? No one size fits all. Experiment and see what feels good for you.
So we're constantly adjusting, fine-tuning as we go, as we learn.
Exactly. And don't forget, this whole idea of the second wind, it's a journey, not a destination. You're going to have ups and downs, times when you feel unstoppable and times when you need to, pull back and recharge.
Good point. It's not about reaching some perfect state. It's about, embracing the whole process.
Yeah, and trusting yourself as you go.
Definitely. So as we wrap up our deep dive, what's your biggest takeaway? What's the one thing you'll be thinking about?
For me, it's this. Pushing boundaries, embracing being uncomfortable, that's super important for reaching our full potential. But to be truly successful, we also need to know ourselves, know our needs, our limits. It's about finding that balance between moving forward and taking care of ourselves, between unleashing chaos and finding some inner peace.
That's a really great insight. And it leads me to one last thought for our listeners to chew on. Can we actually have both? Can we have this intense drive, this go insane energy, and still have balance and well-being? Or are those two things just completely opposite?
Now, that's a great question. And ultimately, each person has to find their own answer. There's no easy solution, just like with everything we've been talking about today. But it's that exploration, that process of asking these questions and trying different things. That's where the real growth happens.
That's a perfect way to end things. That second wind, it's out there, waiting for you. It's up to each of us to find it in a way that feels right and, sustainable. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.